Chaos in China. Typhoon Tapah made landfall in Guangdong province on the morning of September 8, 2025, with winds reaching 108 kilometers per hour and heavy rainfall that paralyzed much of the country's south. The cyclone's impact coincided with historic flooding in Fujian, where entire communities were submerged after days of extreme rainfall. The storm first struck Taishan, Jiangmen, at around 8:50 a.m. Official reports confirmed a central pressure of 978 hectopascals and gusts equivalent to force 11 on the Beaufort scale. Authorities activated multiple emergency alerts and suspended activities in coastal zones. The system had strengthened rapidly overnight. As it moved inland, Tapah expanded its wind field across the Guangdong coast. 22 weather stations in Shenzhen measured gusts above level 8, with structural damage reported in markets, homes, and public roads. Waves reached up to 3 meters, flooding parks, hotels, and coastal highways. Rescue teams began preventive evacuations in low-lying areas. Authorities warned of possible storm surges and ordered the suspension of all maritime activities. In southern Guangdong cities, drainage systems failed quickly. Entire neighborhoods were underwater within hours. Haikou, on Hainan Island, recorded torrential downpours, while other regions endured winds of force 7 to 9, with peaks up to force 12. But the worst was still to come. The Guangxi Observatory maintained a Category 4 warning, urging residents to stay indoors and avoid travel. The Bibu Gulf, Cheongzhou Strait, and the northern South China Sea were hit by force 6 to 7 winds and dangerous swells. Neighboring provinces suspended classes, rail transport, and maritime connections. In Guangzhou, trains to Zhanjiang and Maoming were canceled. In Hainan, ferry service was halted, cutting the island off from mainland links. The Hong Kong Observatory raised Typhoon Signal Number 8 on the night of September 7th, anticipating the cyclone would pass within 200 kilometers of the city. By dawn, gusts above 100 kilometers per hour disrupted flights, public transport, and commercial activity. In Macau, Signal Number 8 was also raised, along with a blue storm surge alert. Buses, light rail, and shuttle services to Hong Kong were suspended. Ports and ferry terminals shut down to minimize the risk of coastal flooding. On September 8th, more than 55 towns in Guangdong recorded rainfall above 100 millimeters in 24 hours. Nearly 300 towns exceeded 50 millimeters, causing landslides, power outages, and road damage. Over 70 typhoon warnings and 63 heavy rain alerts remained active across the province. The numbers kept climbing. At least 60,000 people were evacuated in Guangdong before landfall. In Fujian, more than 450,000 residents had already been displaced by August floods, worsening the humanitarian situation. Stadiums, schools, and government buildings were converted into temporary shelters. In Fujian, the crisis began on August 7th, when persistent rains linked to a stalled tropical system triggered historic flooding. Rural communities were cut off after bridges and highways collapsed. More than 400 buildings were destroyed and thousands more left uninhabitable. The provincial capital, Fuzhou, saw highway closures and suspended interprovincial trains. Several rail lines were rendered unusable after tunnels flooded. Flights and ferries were canceled for weeks, disrupting regional mobility and supply routes. Energy and communications infrastructure also collapsed in Fujian. Cities such as Guangdong and Fujian experienced blackouts after substations were submerged. Mobile networks went down, forcing rescue operations to rely on satellite phones. Access to clean water became an immediate issue. Treatment plants were shut down due to river contamination. The government distributed bottled water and basic rations in shelters while assessing urban system repairs. Direct economic losses in Fujian had already surpassed 18 billion yuan by mid-August. The figure continued to rise in the following weeks as industrial parks, heavy machinery, and construction projects sustained further damage. The shutdown of tourism added more financial pressure. However, the situation grew worse. As Tapah moved northwest, its outer bands fueled new rainfall over Fujian and Guangxi. Meteorologists warned of up to 280 millimeters in 48 hours, with a high risk of landslides in mountainous regions. The Ministry of Water Resources held daily meetings to coordinate reservoir management and strengthen river defenses. Controlled dam releases were ordered, along with the deployment of teams to prevent flash floods in small rivers and urban areas. Meanwhile, transport remained heavily disrupted. Airports managed partial operations but faced constant cancellations. Rail service did not fully resume until after mid-September. Secondary roads were rendered impassable by landslides. In Guangdong, emergency crews began cleanup after the storm passed. Fallen trees, damaged power lines, and debris blocked roads. Workers raced to restore electricity and communications in rural districts. On September 9th, Tapah weakened to a tropical storm as it moved into Guangxi, but heavy rain persisted. A train effect of continuous storm bands maintained flood risks through September 10th, prolonging the emergency across southern China.